There's a wedding happening in England on June 6th, a royal wedding. King Charles will be there. His son will not. Not because Harry wasn't available, not because of a scheduling conflict, because he wasn't invited. And Charles? Charles will sit at that reception, smile for photographs, raise a glass to the groom, his nephew, and say absolutely nothing about the fact that his younger son is somewhere across the Atlantic, not even knowing what the cake looks like. That's where we are. That's what this family has become. And today, I want to talk about what that actually feels like. Not for Harry, not for the headlines, but for the man who will be in that room. The man who is both King of England and a father who has watched his family fracture in front of the entire world. Because nobody is talking about Charles in this story. Everyone is talking about the snub, the rift, the drama. But somewhere inside all of that, there's a father. And fathers don't stop being fathers just because they put on a crown. Stay with me, because this one goes deeper than you think. Before we get into Charles, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what's actually happening on June 6th. Because if you've only seen the headlines, you might be missing how significant this moment really is. Peter Phillips is the son of Princess Anne. He is King Charles's nephew, and he is, technically speaking, the senior-most grandchild of Queen Elizabeth II, who does not hold a royal title. He was raised inside the family, deeply embedded in it, but always slightly apart from the spotlight, which, if you know anything about this family, is probably exactly how he wanted it. Peter is marrying Harriet Spurling, an NHS nurse, in what sources describe as an intimate ceremony in the Cotswolds. Small, private, deliberately low-key. The guest list reflects that. This is not a state occasion. This is a family wedding, which makes who's on that list and who isn't entirely personal. King Charles will be there, Queen Camilla will be there, Prince William and Princess Catherine are expected, Princess Anne, the mother of the groom, will obviously be there, and Prince Harry, the king's younger son, the groom's first cousin, not invited. According to multiple sources, People magazine, The Mirror, royal correspondent Richard Dolan, Harry and Peter have not spoken in years. The relationship didn't end in a dramatic fight. It didn't end with a public statement or an Oprah interview. It just faded, quietly, the way some friendships do when one person makes choices the other can't follow. And here's what makes this sting differently from the other snubs Harry has experienced over the past few years. Peter Phillips was never really political. He was never firmly in the Team William or Team Charles camp in any public way. He was just family, old family. The kind you grew up with, ran around royal estates with, the kind who knew you before any of this. And now he's getting married, and Harry won't be there. One source put it simply, they just don't talk anymore. That sentence is doing a lot of work, because it doesn't say, Harry did something unforgivable. It doesn't say, Peter made a choice. It says, the connection is gone. And in some ways, that's lonelier than a fight. You can resolve a fight, you can't resolve silence. Now, King Charles knows all of this. He has watched it happen. He is aware, more than anyone, of exactly what June 6th means. And he will get in that car, and he will go. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when duty and fatherhood pull in completely opposite directions, we're about to find out. Because what Charles is carrying into that wedding is something no protocol can prepare you for. We'll get into that, right after this. If this kind of deeper look at the royal family is what you've been looking for, hit subscribe. I cover the stories behind the stories, the human side of the monarchy that the official channels will never show you. To understand what Charles will feel on June 6th, you have to understand something that often gets lost in the noise of this saga. Charles was not a present father when Harry was young. That's not an opinion. That's something Harry himself has spoken about. A childhood shaped by boarding schools, by formal protocol, by a mother who was mentally unraveling in public, and a father who was in love with someone else. Harry grew up in a house where emotions were not discussed. They were managed. Where grief was something you processed alone, preferably quietly, and then moved on. When Diana died, Harry was 12 years old. He walked behind his mother's coffin in front of billions of people. He did not cry in public. He was not supposed to. Charles was walking right there beside him. And even then, even in that moment, the distance between them was visible to the whole world. So when people ask, how did it come to this? How does a father end up in a situation where his son isn't invited to a family wedding and he just goes anyway? The answer is, this didn't happen overnight. This is the result of decades of a particular kind of relationship. One built on love, yes, but also on distance, on unspoken things, on the specific way this family has always dealt with pain, which is to not deal with it at all. Harry tried to break that pattern. That's what Meghan represented to him. A different way of living, more open, more honest, less trapped inside the institution. And the institution, including his father, could not follow him there. There's a specific timeline that matters here, and I want to walk you through it, because it shows exactly how the relationship between Charles and Harry shifted, step by step, until we arrived at this moment. In 2020, Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. At the time, Charles is reportedly devastated.
Not publicly, never publicly, but sources close to him describe a man who felt blindsided. He had hoped, according to multiple reports, that things could be worked out quietly, inside the family, the way things had always been worked out in this family, which is to say, not really worked out at all, just endured. Then comes the Oprah interview in 2021. Harry sits on national television and says there were conversations within the family about Archie's skin color. He says he felt cut off financially. He says he felt trapped. He says his father stopped taking his calls. That last part, Charles stopped taking his calls. Think about that for a moment. A son calling his father and the father not picking up. Whatever your feelings about Harry, whatever you think about his choices, that image is hard to sit with. And Charles never directly addressed it. He released a brief statement saying the issues raised would be addressed privately. That was it. No interview, no direct response. The institution spoke. The father stayed silent. Then came the book, Spare, published in January 2023. Harry wrote about Charles with a complexity that was almost more painful than outright anger. A son who clearly loves his father, who clearly wanted more from him, who clearly never got it. He described Charles as a man shaped by his own painful childhood, passing patterns down without realizing it. He described moments of warmth followed by long stretches of absence. He painted a portrait of a man who could be loving and cold in the same afternoon. Charles did not respond to the book publicly. Of course he didn't. And then something shifted. Quietly, without announcement, Charles became king. In September 2022, Queen Elizabeth died. And something about that, the weight of it, the finality of it, seems to have clarified certain things for Charles. According to sources speaking to various outlets in the time since, Charles has not closed the door on Harry. He has said in various ways, through various people, that he loves his son, that reconciliation is possible. But there are conditions, unspoken ones. There are always unspoken conditions in this family. Harry has not moved back. Harry has not withdrawn the book. Harry has not stopped speaking publicly about his experiences. And from where the palace sits, that means the door can be open, but nothing can walk through it yet. So they exist in this in-between, not fully estranged, not reconciled. A father and son who both say, in their own ways, that they want things to be better, and who have somehow still ended up here. One going to a family wedding, one not invited to it. That's not a political situation anymore. That's a personal tragedy. And on June 6th, Charles will have to hold all of that, every year of it, every unanswered call, every public revelation, every moment he chose the crown over the conversation. And he will hold it quietly in a beautiful venue in the Cotswolds while his nephew gets married and everyone raises a glass and pretends this is just a perfectly normal, happy family occasion. Because that is what this family does. That is what Charles has always done. And if you feel something watching that, some mix of sadness and frustration and recognition, drop it in the comments. Because I think a lot of people watching this have been in a version of that room, where the family is gathered and someone is missing, and everyone agrees not to say it out loud. The only difference is that for most of us, the world isn't watching. For Charles, it always is. We're almost at the end of this, and I want to close with the question that I think actually matters. Not,
Will Harry and the family reconcile? Everyone asks that. The question I want to ask is harder, and it says something about Charles specifically that I haven't heard anyone else bring up. Here's the question nobody is asking.
Not can Charles fix this, but does Charles believe it's his job to? Because there are two very different versions of what's happening inside that man right now. Version 1. Charles is a father who genuinely doesn't know how to reach his son, who has tried privately in the ways he knows, which are limited, shaped by his own upbringing, by a childhood that didn't teach him how to say the hard thing out loud, who looks at June 6th and feels a quiet grief he will never express, because expressing it would require a kind of vulnerability the institution has spent a century training out of the people who wear the crown. In this version, Charles is a man who loves his son and is simply, tragically, not equipped to show it in a way Harry can receive. Version 2. Charles has made a calculation that the monarchy's survival depends on stability, that every time Harry speaks publicly, every interview, every book, every headline, it destabilizes something Charles has spent his entire life waiting to protect. That reconciliation, in any real sense, would require the institution to acknowledge things it cannot afford to acknowledge. And so the door stays theoretically open, the statements stay carefully warm, and nothing actually changes. In this version, Charles is not a helpless father. He is a king who has chosen the crown, again, and dressed it up as something more complicated than it is. The painful truth is that it's probably both, at the same time, in the same man. That's what makes Charles such a genuinely tragic figure in this story. Not a villain, not a victim. A person caught between two identities that have never fully fit together, who has spent 80 years trying to make them coexist, and who is still, somehow, failing at it. On June 6th, the car will arrive. Charles will step out. He will look well. He will shake hands and embrace his sister, and watch his nephew marry the woman he loves. He will probably make a toast, or at least be present for one. He will smile in photographs, and somewhere in that, there will be a moment, maybe just a second, maybe less, where something crosses his face, where the father surfaces through the king, where he thinks about Harry, maybe about a younger version of him, before all of this, maybe about the last conversation they had, whenever that was, maybe just a flash of something unnamed that he pushes back down before anyone can see it. Nobody will capture that moment on camera. Nobody will report on it. But it will happen, because he is still a father, and fathers don't stop being fathers just because they've learned to hide it very, very well. I keep coming back to something Harry wrote in Spare. He described a conversation with his father, one of the attempts to bridge the gap, where Charles said something to the effect of, "This is just how it is in this family," as if the distance were a fact of nature rather than a choice, as if the silence were inherited, not built. And Harry, who had spent his entire adult life trying to escape exactly that, heard it as a door closing. Charles, perhaps, meant it as an explanation. That gap, between what one person says and what the other hears, is the whole story. Not the Oprah interview, not the book, not the wedding guest list. Just two people who speak different emotional languages, who grew up learning that love looks like endurance and duty and quiet sacrifice. And one of them decided, somewhere along the way, that he wanted love to look like something else entirely. You don't have to agree with Harry's choices to understand that impulse. You don't have to excuse the things he said to feel something for what he lost. And you don't have to think Charles is a bad man to recognize that sometimes, good people cause deep damage, not through cruelty, but through the very patterns they never knew they were repeating. So here we are. June 6th is coming. Peter Phillips will get married. It will be beautiful and private and exactly what he wanted. King Charles will be there. Harry will not. And the question that will hang in the air, unasked, unanswered, as it always is in this family, is whether any of this ever changes. I don't know the answer. I'm not sure Charles does either. But I think the most honest thing you can say about this moment is this. The wedding isn't the story. The empty chair is. Not literally. Harry wouldn't have been sitting next to Charles in any physical sense. But symbolically, in the way that matters, there is a space in that room on June 6th that should belong to a son. And it doesn't. And the man who could do the most to change that will be right there,
in the same building, saying nothing. If that doesn't move you at least a little, you haven't been paying attention. Leave me a comment. Do you think Charles wants to fix this? Or has he already made his peace with how things are? I read every single comment on this channel, and this is exactly the kind of conversation I want to have with you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the channel for exactly this. Not the headlines, not the gossip, the real story underneath all of it. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.